friends. Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Jon Langford. You might know Jon from the Mekons, the Three Johns, the Waco Brothers, the Cat and John Band, the Pine Valley Cosmonauts, the Saddies, the Wee Hairy Beastie, Skull Orchard, Bad Luck Jonathan, Men of Gwent, or the Four Lost Souls. He is a man of many talents. Not only is he a singer-songwriter for most of these bands, or a part of a singer-songwriter in most of these bands, but he also does art. One of his many projects has been a portrait series for the Country Music Hall of Fame, featuring Dylan, Cash, and they're breathtaking and beautifully done, and they're really, it's interesting. A lot of his art has this really cool play with words, and we get into that in the interview. Jon is someone I've been aware of for a long time. It was an honor to talk to someone who has such a prolific career in many different fields. One of the main things that's so inspiring about him is all these endeavors that he does are so different from the other. The ability to adapt and do so many different styles of music and art and expression and be able to do it well is something we should all aim to do. And here is a living example of someone whose whole career has been that and shows that you can do it and you can do it well. Jon's playing Thursday, August 5th with the Waco Brothers at the Music Box in Cleveland, and Wednesday, August 4th at Blue Arrow Records for a special tribute to their drummer they just lost, Joe Camarino, whose career was also pretty extensive, and he had a long resume of bands he played with, one of which you guys might remember, Kelly Hogan, from the NRBQ episode we did with Scott. Make sure to check out one or both those events. They're coming up soon. Before we get into the interview, if you guys can like, rate, subscribe, review, and follow the podcast on all the podcast platforms. It helps me keep talking to amazing guests and sharing these insights with you. And without further ado, here's Jon Langford. Awesome. Because I was talking with Richard Lloyd from television and like asking him some theory questions. He was like, "No one's gonna know." I'm like, no one's gonna care. I'm like, no, I do.
Oh, we had him on he used to do a radio show in Chicago, and he came on the radio station, and I think he was having a bad day, but the whole thing had to be cancelled because he tried to start a fight with the producer.
Oh, snap. That's not surprising, but that's pretty.
It was kind of wild. I was
What's
like,
that,
wow.
the Eclectic show, right?
Yeah, on XRT. He was pretty out of order, but I just loved it. I loved that band so much. So yeah, you have to forgive.
Well, that's part of the legend, right? You know who you called. Oh, but that has to be kind of like a juxtaposition to have, because kind of coming from these like punk roots, and then like doing music and what you do is like you do bits of everything. It has to be kind of like
kinda.
You do art, you do music, you do radio, you got books. Like that's you do a lot, my friend. So like,
well, I get asked to do a lot of things, which is nice. I've really found one of the cool things, over the last few years is other people have cool ideas and say, "Why don't you do this?" And it's like, "Oh, yeah, all right, I could do that." And that's been quite nice rather than having to invent the wheel every time you get out of bed in the morning. So.
It's interesting too, because a lot of people like I don't know, even with like punk in like it seems to be like a very self-driven thing, like the DIY, like we're gonna do this ourselves, and the kind of like it's almost anti-punk to take in other people's ideas, and like I don't want to like stay this is the punk staple, this is what they do, but like if they had to be generalized in a probably not so good way, like it seems to be like this is how we do it, this is I'm right type deal. So they kind of come in and like accept, like, or not accept, but work with certain things as opposed to completely against it. Like,
I totally know what you mean, but I think that's one of the things that I've discovered as I've got older, is that there's still threads that reach back through what I do to the very initial kind of impulses that we had when punk rock started. But I've become there was a kind of like punk rock in England. There was a bit of a cutthroat thing to it, jealousy between bands. It wasn't. I've learned over the years that the things I like about the collaborations and the community and the combining of ideas, and that maybe it's not all about the individual. It's so much as there's quite a lot of that in punk, and it's like it's more about the we. So I think we found that out quite early on because we had a kind of collective with the Gang of Four and Delta Five up in Leeds, but bands. There was a kind of rush to with punk bands. I think a lot of them had a rush to have fame and success, and those things were kind of like almost unpleasant byproducts for us. we weren't that interested, and we tried to sort of scupper that in favor of trying to find other ways to, judge whether what we were doing was, successful or not.
That's what I was going at, because it's the group effort. It's kind of like a Joe Strummer's like, you're without people you're nothing kind of philosophy. Without the group, what's the band other than the individual? And like it seems like with the early punk scene, like bands would just get picked up and thrown out, like or thrown up and presented. So it would make sense that it'd be that cutthroat and that like everyone's fighting for that stage to get to the bigger stage or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, I think that was you look at the cities where the big scenes were, it was like London, New York, LA. Yeah, that's the kind of nature of all branches of capitalism in those places. Yeah. It's the kind of clawing over other people to get where you want to be. And I don't know, the north of England reminds me a little bit of Chicago. There was something different going on, and maybe the signals got a little bit crossed because the people who were there weren't people who were desperate for attention and success, but more kind of like just interested in the ideas that were thrown up at that time. And I've seen the parallel sort of music scenes and art scenes happen in other places where that's really been the case. And I love Chicago now. I live here because I don't know. It just seems to be a lot of like-minded people who want to support ideas. People in record companies, in journalists, in club owners. They seem like they're more enthusiasts than business people.
That's super important because that makes it pure and not just force fed what's going to work, what's going to move tickets and people, because that's not really what moves people in the long run.
No, I think if the motivations of musicians were simply to sell as many tickets, the music would be a bit boring. So
agreed.
There's plenty of people doing that.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of boring music, but that's all right. People can do what they want. But here I feel there's a space for us to do things that are different. And I like I said, I really enjoy collaborating with other musicians. So
was that an easy skill to learn, to work with others, or did it come naturally to you?
No. I mean, there's something built into music where you can just sit down in a room with someone with a different instrument. You just might start making something that's very different to other kind of practices like writing or painting and things like that. But no, I think it's something you have to work at, and you have to work out that that's the best way of doing it.
And you started, well, at least you had the drum kit back when you were going to Leeds for for art. And I
owned a drum kit.
Did you play? Was that your first instrument? Was the drums?
Yeah. I didn't really. I've sort of like, I don't know, playing rugby and soccer for years. I suddenly decided I didn't want to do that anymore, and I was into buying glam rock records and listening to music, and I want to be in a band, But really, in the years when I was kind of going through that, the sort of music that was successful and everywhere it was that prog rock stuff. So, I didn't really like that. And heavy metal. I like some heavy metal, but I just didn't feel invested in any of it, or feel like it felt like I didn't have a license to be part of that club,
Yeah.
Then punk rock happened, and it was like, oh, we can have our own club, we can do whatever we want. When Tom asked me to join the Mekons, he said, do you want to be in a band where no one can play? Which would have been a ridiculous thing to say at probably any other time in history. But totally made sense to me at the time. Oh, we're just going to have a bit of a laugh. And it's going to be fun. And then it's going to last for 45 years.
Were you hip to the band Man?
Yeah, I loved Man. Man was one of the few bands that I actually could go and see regularly because I lived in South Wales.
Nice.
And they played a lot. That's one of the first bands. I think my 16th birthday, Man played the top rank in Cardiff, and my mum drove me and two friends down there, which is pretty cool. Because it was a den of iniquity and a debauchery, and it was fantastic. But because they played a different sort of thing, they were kind of like used to get criticized for playing like 18-minute songs, but they always had this kind of like space rock thing. They were more underground, more like Hawkwind.
Right.
But they weren't, and they really didn't. It was more kind of like, I don't know, probably chemically induced. But it wasn't like Yes or King Crimson. I mean, I quite like King Crimson, to be honest, but there was just a lot of bands that were really noodling, and really it was all about virtuosity. And with Man, it seemed to be, there was a sort of directness, even with the songs that were 18 minutes long. They weren't kind of baroque and just pointlessly complicated. There was a sort of groove that went with the whole thing. I liked them, and I liked Hawkwind very much. But I kind of liked any band I could go and see that were unusual. So there's another band from Bristol called Stackeridge at the same time who were, I don't know if you ever heard their stuff, very strange, and they worked with George Martin. At one point we made an album, great pop songs, but also kind of, they were doing very, very weird kind of like Vaughan Williams-y kind of rural orchestrations of their songs. It was kind of crazy, but we just wanted to. For me, it was in the mid-70s. It was just, I want to go and see bands play live. I don't want to wait for Led Zeppelin to come and play a big festival. I want to be able to go out on a Friday night, and it was kind of a premonition of what would happen with punk rock, because that's what did happen. I could go in the north of England. I could go and see the Buzzcocks. Many times as I wanted in a month, probably. It was
right. Well,
it really did. It kind of democratized the whole notion of music, and suddenly it wasn't about how many notes you could play. It was about how exciting you were, and it was a good time. I saw a lot of great stuff at that time.
There's something to actually feeling it and being close to it, and like, I don't know, the bigger shows start to become more of what they are, a bigger show to some degree, and like you can't. I don't know, when it's dispersed that much, you're not as physically moved by it as being crammed into a sweaty room and like, oh man, they're gonna fall on us. Which I guess
that was it. I think the first Man was the first stand-in gig I went to, because I went to a couple of things at theaters, and you were in the seat sitting down, and
right.
everybody was incredibly hairy and sort of clouds of marijuana smoke hanging in the air. And then, then I sort of went to see Man, and it was different. It was a bit more like energetic. And then, the bands started coming up, like the pub rock bands, and we really liked Graham Parker and the Rumour, and I really liked Dr. Feelgood, bands like that, which I never saw them live till a lot later, but they were kind of on TV a couple of times, and it was just like, wow, these guys got short hair and they play really fast, and this looks exciting,
Was watching Man, was it like, I can handle those drums? I can find that pocket, because like, what made drums like seem like the easiest way to musically convey yourself? Were they around?
For me,
Yeah.
because it's just banging something rather than having to play notes. I tried to learn to play the guitar a bit. No, it was just the way in, but I wasn't that serious about it until the fact that I actually had a drum kit was like, oh, now I can be a drummer in a band.
It's once you get the kit, that's where everyone shows up. That's where rehearsal is. That's where the band happens, because the kit's the hard thing to bring. When you went to Leeds, you went for art. Now, what were you doing? Like, what was the medium to get into college? Were you drawing, painting at the time?
Yeah, I was like a little teenage impressionist. I just went out, and I used to sit outside and do quite nice paintings of trees and landscape. I had no real idea what I was doing. I just liked the idea that I was quite skilled as a draftsman, and that was one of the easier things in school for me, to be honest. It was the path of least resistance. I can do this. I could always draw. I don't know why, where it came from, but I used to spend a lot of time copying, like just photographs from newspapers and doing comic-y stuff. And then I kind of I had a good art teacher at school, actually. I really liked him, and he was really into kind of poetry and turned me onto a lot of, the connections between, kind of Welsh art as well, actually. Like, I learned about Dylan Thomas, poetry, and painters like Kerry Richards and people like that. You could go and see those people's art as well in like museums in Cardiff and stuff. I didn't have to go to Paris to see the art. But I was really just a bit clueless. It was just like I was on this path. My parents weren't that keen on it, but I was quite keen on the idea of going away to the north of England to art school, and I thought they'd just let me sit and paint all the time, and I could, impress people with my draftsmanship, and then I'd be all right. But it wasn't. When I got there, it was like, I don't know. It was just kind of. It was a sort of art department in transition, and there was a kind of. I was a bit of a hick. I didn't really know much about terribly modern art, so I was not really up to speed, and no one wanted me to paint. And I was like, well, if you don't want me to paint, then I won't paint. No, don't do that. I mean, I understand what they were getting at, but it became, I don't know, it was just became somewhere where I felt like a kind of a bit defensive about the drawing and stuff. And I thought, I'm not going to do this. So I just kind of didn't do it for a long time because I didn't want, I didn't really have any ideas of what I wanted to do, and I didn't have any way of, pleasing my professors particularly. So I kind of, and then punk rock came along, and we was just like, yeah, this is happening. This is interesting. I know what I'm doing here.
Right.
So while I remained in art school, that was a kind of struggle because, I was deeply unproductive. So
it's interesting with like academic art in a way. Like it's almost like they, at least from experience from talking with some close friends, they kind of train you to like look at something and see what's wrong with it in a way. And I mean, it becomes very critical, and it seems like that competition that competitive, like not pure expression comes in, and I get that part of it is to.
Oh, it was very competitive there, and and I didn't really value the opinions of the teachers in my first couple of years. We had these guys that were, to me, they seemed like really weirdly old-fashioned sort of 60s people, and it was obvious something had changed, and they were, there was a lot of favoritism and weirdness, and I didn't want to take part in it, and. It was much more gratifying in a way to be involved in this kind of, rebel thing with the punk rock, where your parents hated it and all your teachers hated it, and it was, that just seemed like what was going on and what was gonna, a venue, like a stage to make something on, rather than, pretending to be an impressionist painter. Things changed though. Actually, when we actually left college, me and Tom dropped out. Everybody else had finished, and we went and signed to Virgin Records, and then that was all a bit of a disaster. But we went back to art school, because in Britain at the time, you got paid to go to college. You didn't have to pay for it. We got money from our local county council to go to college, so we was trying to sign on the dole, and that wasn't working out. And I told Tom, we should just go back to school. We can go back to Leeds and go back to art school. So we did that. And then when we got back, it was kind of amazing. It was like the world had totally shifted, and where the ramifications of what punk was, suddenly all the teachers were like, oh, punk rock's really cool. We knew all along. You guys are great. And suddenly we'd been out there, being chopped up in the music biz trenches, and we go back to art school, and suddenly we're kind of scary because we've been in the real world in this cultural event, which is suddenly everyone's realizing that something actually just happened, and we missed it. So
Right.
we were like conquering heroes going back to art school, and I had a great year, and I got in with a couple of the professors then. There was different people there, and they really helped me, actually. They encouraged me with my painting, and that's when I started taking it really seriously. So
Well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful turnaround, and coming from following the wave of like just doing something to express yourself, and then to come back and like get the respect for that. That's like, usually the story goes that the person doesn't go back, and you never get to
yeah.
hear that praise. So that's so rad, and
Well,
like
it wasn't it wasn't like we got praise, but we were kind of like, we didn't know what we wanted to do. We were pretty confused at that time because we thought the whole band thing had just gone.
right,
But I think some of the stuff that was going on at art school had rubbed off on us. So the Mekons actually and the Gang of Folk kind of rigorous. We weren't just, it wasn't just like some kind of hedonist self-expression. It was kind of like purpose to almost
right,
everything we did, even though there was a lot of stuff that was bonkers and accidental. We were actually, we had a sort of like idea of where we fitted into the structure of it and why we were doing the things we were doing. That then rubbed off on the paintings I started making. I wanted to make paintings that were definitely about my experiences and what I've been doing. So I think when I moved to Chicago in the early '90s, then really kind of felt like it was time to do visual art. The stuff I'd learned from being in a band and the way I'd thought about songwriting and the way I thought about the power structures involved in the cultural area we were working in. That really helped me with the painting as well. It seemed like there was lots of parallels, which at first it didn't seem like that at all. I mean, but
I find it
yeah,
interesting with your work, and kind of hearing maybe where it came from, but your paintings have a lot of words in it, and there's a lot of wordplay with the image, and like now kind of you saying your first art teacher kind of introduced you to poetry too. Was there
yeah,
like
yeah.
a maybe later on after writing songs and being more expressive verbally to come around to it? Did it make sense? Did it all just fit together, or was there like there was the cuckoo. I remember reading an interview where you were trying to paint the cuckoo song,
Yeah, yeah.
and you're one, two questions on that. Did you ever figure out what that was about? And two, did that kind of dive into like a visualizing the lyrical process like that, kind of make that approach clear with like
I think
expressing
songwriting, like I said, is an abstract. Music's kind of fairly abstract in a
right,
way. It's not, you can't, it's like, I find it hard to say, well, yeah, here's a sad chord and here's a rousing bit of militaristic stuff. I mean, you have all those things, but simple references. But for me, what my way into sort of writing songs was through the words. I didn't really, we, I actually liked the idea that, um, when we started writing in the sort of early mid '80s with the Mekons trying to do the Fear and Whiskey album, that there were these tunes out there that have been three chords. They've been thought out, revamped, reworked, and also there's lyrics out there. There's pools of lyrics out there that you listen to lots of folk songs, and it's like an oral history, and these things they're not the product of one person's fantastic, inspiration and imagination. There's lots of words out there. And you talked about the cuckoo song, and I think that's fantastic because I've actually seen a version of the cuckoo in kind of Chaucerian English in a church in Reading where my brother lives. We were walking through one day, and there was this plaque, and it had the words and the dates, and it was, I don't know, like from 1200 or something. It just
wow,
said,
yeah.
"I cuckoo esteem pretty birdie," And it's like, oh, right. So just these songs, these songs traveled, and now everything's like Metallica own, if you play a certain set of notes in a certain order, it's owned by somebody phenomenally rich who's going to sue you. But that wasn't what was going on. The way music developed over thousands of years was people borrowing, pushing things around, and we actively kind of indulged in that, when I was trying to write songs, and I'd look at other sources of songs and look at other people's written word, basically co-opt pieces, steal pieces, put them, make them things that weren't songs, make them into songs, and and also see the whole thing as some great big living, breathing cultural monster that's been going down the ages, rather than like, oh, I'm going to write a song that no one's ever thought of before, which seems a bit kind of naive.
I really agree with that, because I think a lot of there's only 12 notes in the, at least in our music, and like everything else is in between, but still that ratio stands the same. Everyone's just reorganizing it. And it's almost like when we learn to speak, right? We're imitating so we can convey ourselves eventually. We're all going to say hello or goodbye at one point, and no one's going to, I mean, like with music and art, it's a conveying, and like, it is interesting that like everyone stakes the claim of this is my diminished fifth, this is my blue note, this is my chrome bebop run. It's all the same note, that crunchy note in the middle there, and there's all this. It's interesting that people stake claims to it, but it really is just shared expression. I think there's something of value within sharing your influences and wearing them on the sleeve, being like, I like Gang of
that's
Four.
what we wanted to do. That's what we really wanted to do, and that we thought about. You'd listen to a Jimmy Rogers song, and he'd listen to other songs from the same period, and you'd go, oh, that verse is from another song. That's just, and it probably goes back, ages. It's probably, if we had, just because we've got recorded music, doesn't mean that's where something started.
Yeah.
So in the end, we sort of reluctantly became folk musicians, because we're like, oh, it's all just folk music.
Right. Well,
there is a sort of manufactured pop music which is made by professionals to sell. There's some of that, and I like some of that, but mostly, pretty much everything that comes from the grassroots upwards is a kind of folk music and functional music, and we just got very interested in just thinking about how the history of how songs were written and how they were made. And it wasn't, there's a way to do this. You don't have to sit around and go, oh, I'm not inspired today, And it was the same with art. I thought, if I'm a painter, I'm a cultural worker, and I get up in the morning and work, and I have, mechanisms to make me make stuff,
right.
and it's not like, oh, I'm starving in my garret waiting for my muse to fall upon me.
I think that's super important too, because there's so much of that ethos of like, inspiration will strike, until then you wait. But it seems like it's more just constantly working at a thing, whatever, if it's music or if it's art, if it's writing, just constantly like having like a routine. Do you have like,
I think it's like, it's like exercise almost. You get the muscles tuned up, and they actually, I always think with songwriting, sometimes I don't really know where songs come from, but it might be because I've been doing something else, it might be because I've been painting, but the subconscious is kind of like churning away and doing things, and sometimes things just pop up. But I think they come from like the process of things you've been doing. I always find if I'm working really hard with paintings, I will write a lot of songs, and it's like turning on a tap,
yeah,
and it's the force, as you would say. But the more you kind of do it, the better. It's, I don't know. It's tricky, because when you, having said that, when you totally focused on trying to get a song right, it usually turns into a disaster. So
That is weird how like when you give something too much attention, it doesn't
yeah,
it doesn't
I
come
do
to
like
fruition.
songwriting as well, because it's like it can be, you can be really kind of brief, and you can get these ideas down,
Right.
quite a lot of ideas down. You can just get, and it's. I always look at a sheet of paper and go, that's enough. I don't need to have, I always think I have too many words in my songs, I said, let's simplify this a bit, But it's a nice thing to be able to do, and to, a practice that we've, been involved in for a long time. I tried to write longer things like novels, not novels, short stories, and
Yeah.
I find that very hard.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a whole nother like you get to describe a scene for like a novel. There's so much you have to think about the whole picture and describe every little aspect of it. Where in a song or a poem, you can kind of condense that, and then it's interesting because like both of them are noble feats and like not an easy task to do. It's just as hard to write something vaguely and like more quick than it is to be able to describe everything in great detail. But also vice versa. It's really hard to describe the whole scene. And um, with as far as like songwriting, like, are you familiar? Actually, in Chicago, are you familiar with Steve Dawson?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
I would say Steve Dawson is a friend.
Nice. Okay, I just talked with him because he's got his new record coming out. But
No, he's great. He's a really good guy.
yeah, he said this quote from I think it was Picasso. I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say it was from Steve. He said like inspiration finds you when you're working. So as you're working out a thing or shedding on a thing, you're in that mindset. It seems like, and like that's when and it seems just how you described with painting, how multiple things will come out. If it's a
I find it's when we're in like a situation with a few of us and we're working on, like, the Mekons are working on an album. Suddenly you get to a point where it's just so easy to find ideas and things, and you're bouncing the ideas off each other. And it is like a kind of faucet being turned on. It's almost like, fucking hell, we have to get all this down, because, you could just write, what something, you can see half a picture, and you know what the other bit should be. It's, yeah, I mean, that's the point. And I've really never found that so much outside of, what we do with them, Mekons, call it music, call it songwriting, whatever you like. But, that's definitely, you can set up a situation where you kind of know it's going to, we never really had times where we're like, oh, what are we going to do? It's just, things tend to sort of go off quite quickly, And there can be many, many different ways to start, but,
It's beautiful, and like you guys have been working. Well, coming from that kind of like, well, let's be in a band where no one knows how to play. It almost seems like there's that group ethos has to exist. This like, um, this big brain unit of being able to pick up what someone is leading towards. Is it kind of like a trade of hands? Like someone comes in with like a chord progression or a lyrical like uh, um a narrative they want to present and then brings it to the group when you guys are having those condensed focus like studio sessions, or is it
it's usually like very half-formed ideas.
okay? Okay, so it's
Almost like could just be a word or a concept, or, then usually first we'll think of the title of the album,
okay.
and then all these things will extrapolate from that. It's,
So when you thought of the curse,
well, that was just we thought we were cursed.
I've heard that was your blood that wrote out the Mekons on that.
It's true, yes.
That's a fair amount of blood.
Uh,
Maybe the
it
picture
was,
looks bigger. I don't know.
no, it was. I didn't like. You can lose quite a lot of blood. But the weird thing was, I was trying to find the easiest way to get blood out of my body.
Yeah.
And I think somebody said, jab yourself in your earlobe.
Whoa.
Of course, that's completely impractical because you can't see your earlobes. So I think I did that, and then I had blood running down my neck, but I couldn't tell how to gather the blood. So then I think I pricked myself in my calf because that was like a natural palate.
Right.
And it was like, oh, you just prop your leg up here, and as the blood comes out, you can paint with it. So that's what happened. But I think somebody rang the doorbell, and I had sort of blood on my T-shirt and my neck, and my trouser leg rolled up with blood all down it. And I answered the door, and because a bit of screaming and panic. But
that's awesome. That's awesome. What are you doing? No, just writing a curse. What? Yeah, how's it going?
Yeah.
Come on in. I'm good. I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, I don't think they came in.
That's awesome. But when did guitar become like? When did you start to figure that out? Like the kind of backtrack. When did you mentioned you worked on it a little bit before the drums, but when did because guitar's like the mode of expression. I feel like.
I had when Delta 5 formed.
Okay.
It was the Mekon Soundman.
Yeah.
And the Mekon's ex-bass player, Roz, who was quite close friend of mine from college. And then she just said, you should play guitar. You could play guitar. Because I'd probably picked up a guitar and just done a few things. And I was like, I thought you knew 2 chords. And I was like, all right, I could be in it. It's all the songs are going to be the same key. It's just you just find a note. And I was like, oh, I can do that. And it was actually we actually did a bunch of gigs, and I was kind of in the band for a while. And it was nice, but then we'd signed to a major label, and they were getting their sort of thing together. So I left, but pretty soon after the Mekons finished with Virgin, and everyone a lot of people just wandered off. I started a band called the Three Johns, and it was somehow I became the guitarist in that. It wasn't really, there was no it was even looser than the Mekons when it started, that band. It was just a bunch of people getting drunk in the afternoon and reading poetry into cassette machines and banging bongo drums and stuff. But I don't know, it turned into a pretty good band, and that was definitely where I learned, what I wanted to do on a guitar. And again, it was very economical. I used a bottleneck. So once there was a solo, I just go mad and slide the bottleneck around all over the guitar and play by ear, find the notes. And then there was a lot of kind of fairly brutal kind of riffing on the bottom couple of strings and a few chords tossed in as well. But it was. But what I used to do is I used to program the drum machine for that band. Okay. So it was kind of like a little magic trick, because I could program the drum machine to fit exactly with what I could play on the guitar, and then kind of make it sound really good. And the bass player was a really good musician. He was a guitarist, but he decided he wanted to play bass, and he was very melodic, and it just had a certain strange magic to it. Didn't really sound like anything else, which was nice, because it was not many people were using drum machines at that time, and particularly not like the way we were using them. Drum machine would be for a sort of synthy electronica band, but we were sort of almost like the Stooges or something.
It's like the juxtaposition of like the folk instruments with the electronic backing to it. It fits, but like I can see like how at first I'd be like, what are these guys doing?
It was odd. The Three Johns was an odd band, and the Mekons, at the same time I was doing that, the Mekons were veering off into having violins and accordions and
in the bouzouki thing, right? Or it's like a
loose saz, yeah.
It's the cousin of the bouzouki, right? It's got like 3 strings as opposed to.
That's the Turkish version of the. I think it's pretty much the same as the bouzouki, but it's Turkish.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And there's some.
That instrumentation for the Mekons is awesome. Like,
thank you.
because it's you don't see all that put together, then hear reggae tunes. You're like, what?
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
but,
A lot
but
of people's, a lot of influences and ideas have to be accommodated in that band. It's good.
right. Well, it's cool that it all fits and it all goes to serve the song. Like it doesn't seem like the accordion guy shredding like out of place licks. It all fits. And you guys, the Mekons were for a minute. Were you guys were using a drum machine too, right? Was it the same drum machine from the Three
Yeah,
Johns?
it was. It was the same drum machine.
Same drummer?
I was programming it. Yeah, I think the first half of I think there's three tracks on Fear and Whiskey which are using the Three Johns drum machine. Yeah, which incidentally his name was Hugo, the drum machine.
That's awesome. Hugo did good.
Hugo's great.
Now with the bottleneck, that's interesting. So were you playing in? I imagine it'd be like an open tuning, right? So to play those chords, you're just kind of
No, it was a
no.
regular
Oh,
standard tuning.
okay. That's a little more harder to really get that bottleneck to
Well, if you
sound
think
nice.
about, I just limited how many strings I hit most of the time.
Okay.
Or I was game for total sonic warfare. So
Right.
they wasn't. But I found that an A shape, going up the neck, you got those three strings, and then you flip over to that kind of minor thing with the top three strings,
Okay.
and that seemed to,
Get it through.
it was limited, but you could squeeze some excitement out of it.
So when with the second Mekons record, you guys were working with Bill Leader, right? And he like
Yeah,
kind of introduced the kind of punk elements of folk music. Now working with did that kind of like going into the Three Johns, like when there was that kind of like not knowing what was going to happen, is that kind of what like cemented that like approach to guitar, or was it just like I can express this way, let's run with it? Because those guys were real folk aficionados, right?
who was that?
Bill and John Gill.
John Gill. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's become apparent that Bill Leader was almost like the Alan Lomax of Britain.
Mm.
The stuff that he promoted, that he produced and recorded, a lot of his field recordings as well. He's a very, very important figure in British folk music, and we just stumbled on him. We had no idea. He was just this guy living in this house in Halifax. We had no idea who he was, and then working with him a little bit, he suddenly said, "I got this young guy. It might be better for you guys to work with." And, "Oh, we like you, Bill. You're great." I said, "No, I'm going to get John Gill to come up." He worked with the Sex Pistols in London. We're like, "Oh, okay, that'll be interesting."
Yeah.
But when we started the second album for Virgin, and then they dumped us, and Bill actually sat us down and offered to put the album out on his label. We were like, wow, by then we'd worked out kind of who he was, and he'd explained a lot of things to us. And we were like, we just didn't want to burden him with it, frankly, because we had no idea if anyone was willing to put it out. We did get it put out in the end on Red Rhino, which was more of a punk rock thing. It did quite well, and it was a good album. But yeah, no, the recording sessions with Bill and John Gill would be very educational to us, and there'd be the clunk of the tape machine going off, and one of them would say, "Let me tell you about this," and then we'd be sitting on the floor, in the control room, just listening to all these mad stories, and finding out about how they identified things in us that we didn't know were there. So they said we were like a folk act. They said we were like the limitations of our musicianship was what made us interesting, and how almost like the limitations of the instruments in Cajun music give that a certain sound. They compared us to that, and it was great. And then also played us loads of kind of dub reggae stuff, and were quite happy for us to experiment with tape loops, and it was just a very, after being on being with Virgin and being on this sort of 3-chord punk band that did a certain thing and had some success doing it, it was just time to be like, no, we're not going to do any of that anymore. But what then do we do? And it was, it was just a fantastic mistake to turn up at Bill Leader's studio. I think our manager found it in the Yellow Pages. We just went there because it was sort of fairly cheap and fairly nearby, and we met, this incredible person. So happy accidents.
Right. It almost is very kind of like the bands you were saying you were drawn to from the rip, seeing these bands that are doing this weird, just creative thing. And once the punk kind of end of it hit like a thing where it was like becoming formatic, they get this restart.
That happened very quickly with punk rock.
Now, what can you tell me about Terry Nelson?
Terry was a DJ here in Chicago, and he met up with a Gang of Four, and Phil, who was the bass player in the Gang of Four's brother, was roadieing for him. And he was actually my roommate up in Leeds for quite a long time, flatmate. And he just moved to London, and Terry came over, and he said he was asking Phil about the Mekons. He says, the Mekons, yeah, they still exist. One of them lives in my house. And so Tom, I think, was living in Phil's house at the time, and in Brixton. And Terry came over, and I was still up in Leeds, but he had this thing. He wanted to find the pretty things in the Mekons, because both were sort of like in a hiatus at the time. And so he not only found the British things and the Mekons, he got Dick Taylor to join the Mekons. So we had the kind of legendary 60s rock guitarist playing with us, which was fantastic. Just amazing.
He did stuff with Jagger, right, before the Stones?
He was in the Stones before.
In the Stones. Before the Stones.
He was. They got. I think he left because he didn't want to. He didn't want to play bass. He wanted to play guitar, so he formed his own group.
That's interesting. Like the bass player always gets the gig. Everyone needs the bass player.
Yeah, that's how Bill Wyman got the gig.
You're right. And they've been missing a bass player ever since.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, and he also he introduced you guys to like American country artists, right?
Yeah, a lot of. We were, like I said, we were already getting into Jimmy Rogers and Hank Williams and a lot of Cajun stuff, and swamp pop was another thing we really liked, like this kind of Louisiana jukebox kind of stuff, which was a mixture of a lot of basic kind of a lot of white guys doing soul numbers, but with steel guitars and accordions and stuff. It's really just very cool, and it seemed to us like very functional music. Then he introduced us to more classic honky-tonk stuff like Merle Haggard, George Jones, Ernest Tubb, Hank Thompson, Patsy Cline. Some of that was on there, some Loretta Lynn, and we were like, oh, this totally makes sense. We were only probably in our mid to late 20s, but we were, all these songs are about drinking and lost love, and that's what he said. Terry actually said to the Mekons that we were like a country band because all our songs were about drinking in bars and failed sexual relationships, and it's like, yep, that's pretty much it. And then we felt, and I liked the thing about all those artists I just mentioned, that it seemed like they conquered that whole gap between the artist and the audience. What we couldn't stand in the 70s was these bands wearing capes singing about elves and wizards, and people and playing a million notes a minute. Someone like Merle Haggard was writing very, very simple, direct songs, which were very much about the lives of the people who were consuming that material. So it was almost like they'd effortlessly erased this gap between themselves and their audience, like they kind of were their audience, but it wasn't this was different. It wasn't just like a sort of folk music. There was these sort of playful, clever, witty songs. Very, it was a complete revelation to me. And while the rest of Britain was going off to, listen to acid house music and make techno, we were thinking about Ernest Tubb.
Different direction there, but
yeah,
quite the turn. It's interesting that kind of like, because with techno music, it's like, or even those trance music, it's less, it boils it down to like one thing. So whatever on top can be like entertaining, and like in the same way, kind of like with country music, the chord progression or the melodic aspect is pretty droned in a way. Like there's movement, but it's not too movement. You know what I mean? Like where the story, the thing on top is what is really, I think, what resonates.
yeah. No, it's storytelling,
Right. So did he introduce you to the Sundowners, or was that when you went to Chicago?
Yeah.
You met those
Yes.
guys. Okay.
Yeah, we were in Chicago one night, and we just went down there, and after a show, I think at the Cubby Bear, we all went down. We all had hats and shirts and shit we bought at a Western Wear show in Chicago that afternoon, and we all went. And then the Sundowners kind of saw us come in, and they were like, "Look, we got a band here. You guys, you want to get up and play?" And we're like, "Nope, no, we don't need to do that." They just kept insisting. So in the end, we got up and played, and we were all absolutely terrible. But for them, it was, I don't know, they had a break while we were up. But I don't know, they seemed to think we were kind of amusing, and I became very good friends with them over the years.
Right.
Very sad that they're all gone.
But it's amazing, even just that break, and I don't know, maybe like I'm sure you've had that experience when like playing in a different type of gig, maybe like a Wee Harry's in the Beasties gig, and you see a guy that looks like they play. You get up and do the kid song for a minute, or like that break is super appreciated in like. But when you can share that kind of experience with someone and work through that state, I mean, it's something you don't really, not too many people get to share that kind of feat of like, of sharing the same stage and trying to entertain the same audience. So like, it's a really interesting bond to have, and I think it's one that resonates deeper than maybe just a conversation or maybe even recording something.
Well, the fact that they would, I made a point of when I ever went back there to have something in me, in the back pocket.
Right.
So I learned a few songs so I could actually get up there and sing a song with them, because they always asked. And, they never said, "Oh, you're not as rubbish as you used to be." They were just completely accepting. And we always did things with them. They played my wedding. They're just gentlemen. They were just fantastic.
Do you remember what was like the first song you went back and learned after that first experience?
Be Ready some Johnny Cash stuff.
Okay.
I figured I could pull off the Johnny Cash. That was my idea.
Well, it's interesting. I became aware of your career through a radio show, but it was I think it was the American broadcasting of the Joe Strummer's London Calling.
Oh yeah. They had me narrate it.
And like, did you knew Joe, right?
Yeah, I met him a few times. Yeah.
'Cause like, did you guys ever share bills or cross paths with?
Yes. A couple of times we played. We opened for the Clash. The Three Johns opened for the Clash in like the 80s, and I think it must have been in 99 or 2000, whatever his last show was in Chicago with the Mescaleros. We opened for him, and hung out with him that night as well, and it was pretty entertaining.
Well, what was that like? Is he like, was he always playing the radio? Was like the bit, like, was the music always going? Was he like?
Yeah, he always had a little cassette machine, and he was playing stuff on that. Spliff in his mouth, But he had his daughter with him on that trip, and his wife, and You know, they weren't there when we got to we turned up for sound check and they'd finished their sound check and they'd probably gone back to the hotel or whatever. But we did our set, and then he just emerged sort of on the stage, not the audience could see him, but he was in the sort of wings of the stage, waving his fist in the air, because I said, here's a song about Newport in South Wales, where I grew up, and he'd lived in Newport. And we had a lovely conversation about that night, because he dispelled a few myths, because I had loads of friends who'd say, oh yeah, we knew Woody when he was in Newport, and my cousin taught him how to play the guitar and all this, and he was at the art school. But I found out the truth about it was he was actually at the his mates were at the art school, and he was a grave digger in the cemetery behind my parents' house. It was quite interesting stuff. And we actually put ourselves in the same room. I'm trying to think of where we used to go, but there was one night I was like, did you go to the Melody Maker Rock and Pop competition at Altering Tech in 1974? And he was like, I was there, yeah. And I said, I was there as well. So, but we used to drink in the same pub, and yeah, he's pretty intense.
Were you guys aware of each other while that was all happening, or was he?
No, I was about 5 years younger, so I was just like a little snotty-nosed kid creeping around, But it's funny now. I do know I'm quite very good friends with some people that he lived with in Newport and has kept in touch with over the years as well. So it's like I've seen his first guitar, and I've heard cassette tapes of them rehearsing, and he had his bands were like, they were not punk rock bands. He was really into rock and roll and Woody Guthrie and folk music,
right,
before the Clash. It's really interesting.
Because he was going as Woody, right?
Yeah, that's what that was his nickname. Yeah.
Interesting. What a small world. And that series that you shared of that, like, for me, musically was very important, because it introduced me to all these different styles from around the world, and just like the strummer mythos and like philosophies, and who's this guy at the beginning, and then I dove into your career, and it's is equally as vast as like his music selection. Like, so in my mind, like, you guys running around the same scene, I was like, that makes sense.
Well, I will say there's a lot of parallels with his life, and like you were talking about, Lou plays the Saz, and they both, and Justin Adams, who plays with Robert Plant, is also in a band with Lou, and they're all kids. I think their parents were like in diplomatic corps, and they travelled a lot as kids and went to different places. Strummer lived in a lot of different places as a kid, just in the same thing. And Lou, I think they were all exposed to a lot of stuff, which they found very interesting, and retained that interest. Whereas you have your kind of like classic, a lot of punk rockers were just channeling heavy metal and glam rock and making, a kind of speeded up version of that with angry lyrics. And then from the beginning, you had people who with much broader and more interesting tastes, processing stuff, which was cool.
Right. Well, it was even more punk rock in the sense of punk rock, because there wasn't just the same thing everyone else was doing.
Well, that's the thing. It wasn't meant to be the same thing, but then it, quickly turned into a cul-de-sac. Leather jackets with studs and big Mohicans, and but up in the north of England, there was no punk rock uniform. There was no. You had synth bands. You had kind of a band like the Fall, band like the Buzzcocks doing like kind of weird arty love songs. You had electronic bands in Sheffield. You had like jangly bands up in Edinburgh. People were channeling all sorts of stuff. There was not a style. It was the ethos of it was, making your own entertainment. It wasn't like it had to be a certain way, but of course that's how the music business got the lid on it, because it became a style.
Right. Well, it's got to be able to, they got to put it in some record, some category, some genre thing for it.
Yeah.
What's even, I guess the kind of bounce back. What's even more punk rock is being able to take that gig and do like going back to the wee the wee hairy beasties, like because part of my gig is I work with preschool students. You know what I mean? Like
Right, right.
they're a tougher crowd than your normal
Yeah,
crowd,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
like
You have to
you
keep
need
their
more.
attention.
You need more energy than you arguably need for the punk gig. But what
Yeah,
brought
I've
that about?
most fears just having kids myself
Oh, okay. Okay.
and not really thinking much of any of the kids' music that was coming into the house.
Yeah.
My mate Rick Sherry was in the band Devil in a Woodpile, almost a kind of like a weird punk rock jug band, and me and him and Sally just started talking about we should write our own kids songs because he had little kids as well. And then we got them to sing on the records, the kids, which was fun.
That's awesome.
But what kids? It used to be like Burl Ives used to be about animals eating each other and shit like that. And now all the kids, there's no way you could have a kids record with animals eating each other on it anymore. It's all like rainbow puppy music,
Yeah, definitely can't.
So we just thought we'd go for it and have songs about farting and homicidal squirrels and shit like that.
Right.
It was fun. It was good. It was good, but there was a window, of
right.
when it was interesting, and then actually people in the band were not very suited to entertaining children. So Sally used to sit,
Oh no.
was afraid to open her mouth because she dropped an F-bomb. Rick was kind of worried, fights might break out. So it was it lasted as long as it should have.
Right. It's hard to code switch like that. It's hard to go from talking to a very adult audience like the Mekon's crowd. I'd imagine is much more willing to hear um, rougher jargon than children.
Well, I didn't have a problem with the rough draft. It was just like, what level is kids of different ages? How do you actually communicate with them and just go, hey, let's all jump up and down?
Right.
And it's like, yeah, you would do that, But I think the kids like the records. I mean, the live band it was okay. To me, it wasn't very successful because we obviously weren't children's entertainers, but I think the records were actually really good and really funny, and I know a lot of kids found them quite imaginative. So if that's all we did, that's fine. But
yeah, it's crazy what kids will take. You know what I mean? Like when
I think they really prefer some, and it's a bit bit odd to have just be told that look at this pretty puppy, he's so lovely. It's
yeah.
like they know, kids have dark sides.
Yeah, 100%. Another question I want to ask you is so Elvis's bass player said you sang like a pirate. Maybe this is a good spin-off from the last question, but or a guy a session player who played bass with Elvis.
Well, that's Norbert Putnam.
Okay.
He's original member of the Muscle Shoals, rhythm section.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was also a big producer in Nashville for a while and session bass player up there. Played on black records, played on white records, and ended up working with Elvis right after his death. Wow. Who we loved, and he was on some of the really cool recordings Elvis did at Stax, which is a great album. I don't know if you ever heard that. Yeah, I met him at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and we became buddies. And he said I sound like a pirate, and he wanted to make an album, so we went down to Muscle Shoals to make an album. It was fantastic. It was a lovely time.
What did he meant to say lesbian pirate or just pirate?
No, he never thought I was a lesbian.
Because the Mekons, you guys did that play, like.
Yeah, with Kathy Acker. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it? What stepping into because the kind of backtrack that the record you did with him was your last solo record, right? The Lost Souls.
Yeah, it was a band really, not so much a solo record.
Right.
I mean, I guess I wrote the songs, but it was there was something else good going on there.
It's a super good record. Like that record songwriting wise and sonically is beautiful, and it stands like out of your work. It stands in a very specific spot. So, I mean, coming from Muscle Shoals, that's a very specific area, and you're going to get that sound. But that sonically and just songwriting, it's like nothing else you've put out. I think, in a good way, in a very
Well,
good way.
thank you. I'm really proud of that record.
It's a good record. Those backup singers you have with you rip, like, or lead singers, I should say. I don't, or the
I
other
was going to
singers.
say, yeah, I was going to say, they might, they'll punch me if they see that.
I'll edit that out. The singers you have in that.
They're definitely lead singers, and that was one of the things we had, that was hard to explain. Really, that I thought our voices were meant to be kind of like one voice intertwined, and they weren't meant to be like over there being backing singers. So one of the other names for the project was, you remember that film? There was 20 Feet from Stardom or something.
Oh yeah.
About backing vocals. Yeah, we were gonna call this 6 Feet from an Idiot.
Solid. So I don't know what you did. I mean, the title you went with was pretty good, but that could have.
It was a bit too derogatory to me, so
I don't know if maybe
it made us laugh. It made us laugh, though.
But kind of bounce back to doing the play and like doing other like kind of like more artistic expressions with the band. One thing I found really interesting was the thing you did with Vito
Aconci.
Yeah. But like the thing where the band was built and there was these crazy stage drops and each piece was kind of put together and then it became one unified band at the end. Like,
yeah, it was a very bold idea. I'm not sure if it really worked like how we wanted it to, but we were just willing to, like I said, it was another moment where we were just willing to go along with this guy's vision. And we definitely ended up chipping in and saying what we wanted, how we wanted it to be when we thought things weren't working. But it was a very large step into an unknown territory.
I've never seen or even heard anything like that, like for a band to even approach. What were some of the kind of conflicts that his vision, like, I'd imagine some of it didn't line up with actually how a band kind of functions.
Yeah, it was a bit of that. It was a bit of the main problem was that he wanted it was totally deconstructing the band. He wanted it to be, it was very hard to understand what to do, and still, part of us still wanted it to be entertaining for the audience. And I think he would have been, he's from the conceptual art world. He had no interest in it, in being entertaining whatsoever. So there was a kind of certain difference there, which we really tried to go along with what our instincts would try and make the thing more kind of like maybe more musical or more palatable, perhaps. And, for it to just be as brutal as he wanted it to be was kind of hard. Yeah,
that makes sense because you spend so long trying to like convey yourself, and coming from the folk thing where like you're relating to this artist. Essentially, that's the main goal, I guess, with all music. But like coming from that and like that intimate connection is so keen, and when you work so hard to develop an audience and then just to kind of try to alienate them, that has to be a really weird.
That's a better way of putting it. Yeah, but I think he actually was interested in not patronizing the audience and thinking that they would be interested in something that was so radically different. He was crediting them with quite a lot of intelligence. So.
That's how many times did you guys perform? How much was that? Only one performance? Was there a few?
I can't remember if we did it twice or 3 times.
Okay.
I think we did it 3 times or something. I can't remember, but they were all different. But then we had like a guy mixing the sound live as a dub, so it was kind of a dub thing as well.
Okay.
Which I don't think was in his original plan, but I think he kind of like went with that because.
So it was all kind of. Was the whole thing
But
like
it was the same song. The whole thing was one song.
right? Was it?
And he latched onto that song because it was called 100% Song. And he went, that's it. We can have 5% song, then 30% song.
It didn't build it up one. Okay.
But
awesome.
it built up over all these different permutations of the structure. So different people were playing and lit differently at different points. It was very it was rigorous, and the band's all different as well. Some people in the band, really liked the idea of working with Vito Conchi because they're very, Tom was big fan of Vito Conchi and just thought this was, absolutely great. And then other people were like, who's this kind of weird artist dude? Why are we doing this? So, but that's the nature of things.
Were you hip to Vito and like that type of art coming from?
I knew of him, but I wasn't. I wasn't. Tom was very, very, very knowledgeable about it and passionate about it. Yeah.
Okay.
I liked the guy when I met him. That was my thing. Was that he was just one of the most amazing people I've ever met, but just socially and just someone to be in the presence of was pretty great. Same with Kathy Acker. We've got to work with people, but mainly because we're just really impressed by them as human beings.
Right. It's just it's so inspiring that not like you guys attempt and everyone involved just is gun ho for trying something completely different, and it makes sense coming from your origins, but like to have that mindset and that ethos and that philosophy carry through is very, very impressive. To actually be like water and fit into whatever, and not have like that band ego thing where like, well, we do this.
No, I think that's what I would say there. That that's really destructive. We don't do that sort of thing.
Right.
We would not. We don't. There's a bit of ego there probably, and we had to think, well, why don't we do that? And it's usually there's no good reason. So, but we understand that that's what you have to suppress that.
Right. That's just super inspiring that you guys can do that and adapt all these different things. Is there as far as like a project, when you're presented with one, what's the key factors to be like, yeah, let's do it, or is it like down to try whatever?
No, there's lots of things we decided we wouldn't do because they weren't interesting. But I don't know. It has to be a bit. I suppose there has to be some consensus with everyone.
Right. That's beautiful.
So,
that's very beautiful. Yeah. It's super inspiring. Like us. One thing, when you guys did the pagan band wedding, did that lift the curse?
Yes. Spontaneously, the curse was gone.
Beautiful.
I think the curse actually rebounded on those who messed with us. That was the idea of it. So, because we're still going.
Got him.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, John. I really appreciate your time and hanging out with me and talking with me for so long.
Well, let me know when what you're gonna do with it and when, and I'll endeavor to publicize it as well.
Beautiful. So the Waco Brothers, you guys are playing at Supper Club,
Music Box on the 5th, yeah.
The Music Box on the 5th, and that Wednesday before, you're playing at Blue Arrow Records. Yeah,
we're doing a little tribute to our drummer.
Okay.
Who passed on in January.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
He had real close connections with the people from Blue Arrow Records, so we're doing something for him there.
Beautiful. Like I was saying, John, thanks so much for chatting with me.
No, it's great. Good. We'll have a chat. We'll have a chat and a pint in Cleveland.
Sounds good.